Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that is fascinating, completely wild, and honestly, incredibly misunderstood: the economics of owning a marijuana business. Look, from the outside looking in, running a legal cannabis operation seems like an absolute license to print money, right? But the reality of this rapidly expanding industry is way more complicated and, frankly, a whole lot more ruthless than you might think. It all really starts with this massive central paradox. Think about it. The U.S. legal marijuana market recently hit around $30 billion in regulated retail sales. $30 billion! It's a colossal, incredibly fast-growing consumer industry. And yet, despite this absolute ocean of revenue, hundreds of licensed operators have filed for bankruptcy, and so many more are just barely keeping the lights on. So we have to ask the billion-dollar question: if they're sitting on a retail gold mine, why are so many dispensaries going totally broke? You know the chill vibe consumers see, right? The relaxed environment, a friendly guy behind the counter, perfectly lit jars of flour. It literally looks like the ultimate green rush. But behind the curtain, it is a totally different story. Owners are actually fighting a brutal, uphill war against their own tax code and a cash-only supply chain. And these hidden financial traps quietly kill far more businesses than a bad location or a bad product ever could. Which brings us to a statistic that is just absolutely staggering. Get ready for this. Across the entire legal industry, an estimated 75% of U.S. cannabis operators are not actually profitable. Seriously, 75%. That means less than a quarter of these businesses are actually making a net profit, which is crazy when you compare it to the roughly 2/3 of small businesses in other sectors that do turn a profit. So if you take away anything from our explainer today, it should be this: that green rush narrative, it's mostly a myth for the average operator. So why do so many fail? Well, we've got to start with the massive, almost impossible capital barrier to entry. If you want to open a traditional retail store, you can just walk into your local bank and secure a small business loan. But because cannabis remains federally illegal, entrepreneurs in this industry literally cannot do that. The banks won't touch them. This means funding a new business relies almost entirely on personal wealth, private equity, or tapping into the collective wealth of your network. It creates this fundamentally unfair economic playing field that immediately crowds out everyday entrepreneurs and completely shuts out individuals from modest backgrounds. Let's just break down the actual upfront cash you need before you can even legally sell a single gram. Say you want to open a super lean dispensary in a lower cost state. You're going to need about $250,000 to $350,000 just to cover licensing, a modest build-out, and security. What about a mid-sized storefront in a competitive market? You're easily looking at $500,000 to $1 million. Aiming for a premium license in high-fee states like New York or New Jersey, that figure can push past $1.5 to $2 million. And again, remember, that is all cold, hard cash you have to raise without a single traditional bank loan. Now, this is where things get really wild. Let's talk about the silent killer for these fully state-legal dispensaries. A ghost from a 1980s drug trafficking law called Section 280E of the Internal Revenue Code. This was originally designed to penalize criminal cocaine traffickers. It states that any business trafficking in a Schedule I controlled substance cannot deduct ordinary business expenses from their taxes. And since cannabis is still a Schedule I drug federally, well, they're caught right in the crosshairs. In practice, this means the federal government basically treats these fully licensed, highly regulated, tax-paying state operators exactly like criminal cartels. When tax season rolls around, a normal business deducts its rent, payroll, marketing, utilities, insurance, the whole shebang. A cannabis dispensary? They absolutely cannot. They can only deduct the raw cost of the product itself. Literally, every other dollar spent running the actual business is taxed as pure profit. Let's put this into perspective with some quick math because it's pretty devastating. Imagine a cannabis business and a non-cannabis business side by side. Both pull in $1 million in gross revenue. Both have the exact same product costs. The normal business deducts its $200,000 in operating expenses, meaning it pays a standard 30% effective tax rate. But the dispensary, unable to deduct those same expenses, they are hit with a crushing 70% effective tax rate. They're quite literally being taxed heavily on money they already spent just to keep the lights on and the doors open. And if that impossible tax burden wasn't bad enough, we have the daily, agonizing operational bleed of being unbanked. Because major banks won't touch cannabis money, the entire industry runs heavily on physical cash. Think about what that actually means. You're paying for armored car services just to move your own money safely. You're hiring armed guards, not to protect the product, but to protect the massive piles of cash in your vault. You're hit with elevated insurance premiums, costing an extra $10,000 to $50,000 a year. Oh, and you're paying your landlord, your suppliers, and, ironically enough, the IRS in literal, hand-counted stacks of cash. But hey, the external financial pressures, that's really only half the story. If we zoom in and look behind the store counter, there's a massive internal crisis bleeding these businesses dry too. The retail side of this industry inherited a lot of really outdated autocratic management styles from the old illicit market days, where strict, micromanaged, top-down control was just deemed necessary for security. Fast forward to today, and that highly punitive style creates a deeply toxic workplace culture, frustrating competent employees and causing a dangerous phenomenon called learned helplessness. The immediate result of that toxic management style? Massive, crippling turnover. The numbers show the average annual turnover rate in dispensaries is hitting a staggering 60%. In some shops, the entire staff is replaced within just 18 months. To put that in perspective, that's nearly double the average turnover rate for general retail. And when you're dealing with a highly complex product that absolutely requires knowledgeable staff to ensure both compliance and customer safety, losing your best people constantly is just an operational disaster. And let me tell you, turnover is incredibly expensive. Replacing just one single bud tender costs a dispensary somewhere between $17,000 and $26,500. Yeah, you heard that right. That accounts for recruitment advertising, background checks, intensive formal training, and the weeks of lost productivity while that new hire finally gets up to speed. In an industry where profit margins are already razor thin thanks to that heavy federal taxation, these replacement costs are severely draining whatever little cash is actually left over. So how in the world do successful operators fix this? Well, they completely abandon that rigid, punishing, autocratic style, and they adopt a really dynamic, team-based model called crew resource management, or CRM. Interestingly, this was originally developed in the aviation industry to prevent catastrophic airplane accidents. Instead of strict hierarchies and punishing every single small error, which, just makes employees hide their mistakes, CRM relies on distributed decision-making and blame-free error reporting to create a real culture of teamwork and continuous learning. So what does this actually look like on the ground? Transforming a toxic dispensary culture takes 4 actionable steps. First, foundation building, doing a cultural assessment and practicing leadership transparency. Second, making structural changes to flatten the hierarchy so your frontline bud tenders can actually make local decisions. Third, skill development by fostering psychological safety and peer mentorship. And finally, reinforcing the whole system with shared metrics and a drive for continuous improvement. Dispensaries that actually pull this off have been shown to slash their turnover by up to 55%, saving massive amounts in those training costs we just talked about. Okay, so fixing the management culture stops the internal bleeding. But how do these operators survive the crushing external financial pressures of those federal taxes? Well, enter the ultimate survival hack. The real secret sauce for the most successful operators is a business model called vertical integration. This is where the real margin actually lives, even if it does require a ton of initial capital to set up. Vertical integration basically means doing the whole shebang under one organizational roof. You own the license to cultivate the plant, process it, and sell it over the retail counter, seed to sale. By controlling the entire pipeline, operators can share major overhead costs, like rent and utilities, across the different phases of the business. And because the tax code treats cultivation slightly better than retail when it comes to deducting costs of goods sold, blending all these operations together significantly dilutes that toxic Section 280E tax burden. Let me give you a really clear example of why this is so powerful. Let's say the wholesale production cost for 1 gram of raw cannabis concentrate is $40. If you just sell it wholesale, your margin is tiny. But if you are vertically integrated, you can take that exact same gram of concentrate and use it in-house to manufacture, say, 50 infused edibles. If the profit margin on each edible is $8, that single gram of concentrate you grew just generated $400 in profit for you. Boom. That is exactly the hyper-efficiency required to survive in this game. The crucial takeaway here is that the Wild West days are officially over. You absolutely cannot just open a store, stock a popular product, and expect to get rich. The legal market is actually experiencing intense price compression right now. Retail prices are dropping due to oversupply in a lot of states and heavy competition from alternative hemp products. The green rush as a fun free-for-all? Yeah, it's done. It is a spreadsheet game now. A rigorous, mathematically dialed-in financial forecasting strategy is absolutely mandatory if you want to survive. The reality we have to face is that this industry is rapidly maturing. Chief economist Bo Whitney hit the nail on the head when he pointed out that the U.S. market is at a crossroads. Those days of exponential, double-digit growth driven purely by the novelty of legalization, they're ending. We're moving into an era where single-digit growth is going to be the new normal. It's no longer a guaranteed gold rush. It's a tight-margin retail grind that richly rewards hyper-efficient, well-managed operators and quickly bankrupts everyone else. We've seen today that the biggest hurdles for these businesses aren't a lack of consumer demand. People want the product. The real killers are a crushing federal tax code, impossible banking restrictions, and high internal turnover. Which leaves us with one really massive question for the future. Will federal regulations finally catch up to state laws before the promise of the legal market goes up in smoke? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on the fascinating future of cannabis legislation. Catch you next time.